Wonderful.
And we'll probably just I'll let people in as they come. So
Yeah.
you want to go ahead and another
Sure.
introduction to yourself would be great. Then we can go from there.
Anne is coming with your friend. Anne is coming. And
He's on.
Okay, I'm not able to hear you 100%. Can everybody hear her? Or is it just me?
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, terrific. Good. How's everyone doing today? Thank you so much for having me, Susan. I do love having these workshops and just sharing a little bit about the OT knowledge and world. And at the end, I definitely will have time for questions. And there will also be a presentation that I emailed to Susan that reviews some of the things that we'll talk about today. So just introduce myself. I'm Jess. I am an OT. I've been practicing for 16 years in pediatrics, and I own 3 sensory gyms, 1 in Union Square and 2 in Brooklyn. And I work with children in the sensory gym, but I also work with children sometimes in the school setting or in their homes as well. And our practice has occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy. A lot of the children who come receive multiple services, so there's lots of collaboration. So kind of just starting with what's, OT. Sometimes people are like, what is OT? Because we work on so many different things, but really our goal is independence and teaching children how to get to move through their day independently and functionally and support them. And we look at a lot of the underlying skills that are required for children to play, to be in school, to socialize, and go about their day and to learn. So a lot of the times OTs will address fine motor skills, the small muscles of the hand. Sometimes we'll also address gross motor skills, body coordination, eye-hand coordination, visual motor skills, drawing, cutting, dressing skills. But in the sensory gym, the kind of specialty is a little bit more of a sensory integration. So we really look at the nervous system, and we work a lot with children on regulation. And I find more and more people are asking about self-regulation, and or educators. I'm hearing more from parents of children who are having difficulty with self-regulation. So that's really a big area of OT. Of course, we also work on executive function skills. We work with children on attentional skills as well. We work with children with all different profiles. Some children are neurodiverse, so some children that we work with may have an autism diagnosis or dyslexia or ADHD, and some children don't. So it's not just for children who are special needs, it can be really for any child that needs support. Moving on, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sensory processing, since that's kind of my specialty, owning sensory gyms, and talking a little bit about what is sensory processing. So children and how we learn is through our senses, right? We're taking in all the information visually, tactilely, auditorily throughout our day, and we're able to receive that information, and our nervous system organizes it and sends a message to our brain. And then in turn, we're able to adapt a response. So whether it be a motor response, a language response, but in order to have all of those skills required in the classroom setting, you have to have efficient sensory processing, right? So a child that maybe has difficulty with sensory processing may have difficulty with sounds or touch, and that impacts them day to day. So we're able to take in all that information, organize it, process it throughout the to be able to learn. Sensory processing is very important because it lays the foundation for our nervous system, and it lays the foundation for us to be available to learn. So when a child, again, has difficulty with sensory processing, oftentimes we'll see that maybe they have difficulty with social skills or self-regulation skills. Your ability to take in all the information and adapt and not have very strong reactions to sensory input, or not even on the other side. Sometimes children don't necessarily register the sensory input and don't process it effectively. They're not able to participate in the classroom setting. So being able to take in all the sensory information allows you to be engaged, focus, and play, right? And to do work in the day-to-day activities. Pyramid of learning is something that OTs really focus on, and I think it's important, and you'll see it on the presentation, because OT is very holistic in the sense that we address the bottom layer. We're addressing the sensory systems and the nervous system, because again, when we have efficient sensory processing, it allows us to be able to, in turn, have motor skills, have postural stability, being able to use your eyes and your hands, being able to learn. Children in the classroom setting to have all of those skills to be available to learn. So really, when a child comes to us, look at their systems and how they're responding to information throughout the day. When a child comes in for OT, we typically will have a sensory questionnaire that we'll share with like a school as well as with parents to understand what a child's sensory profile is. Now, we all have different sensory profiles, right? Some of us maybe have sensitivity to some information, maybe to certain noises or touch. Some people have preferences. Some people are very high energy and need a lot of movement and like to exercise a lot. We all have different sensory profiles. The sensory processing questionnaire allows us to kind of determine if a child's having more reactions or a little underreaction, under responsiveness or over responsiveness to sensory input, and how that impacts them functionally. So in a sensory gym, in an evaluation, there's always a school questionnaire to gain more information about how the child responds to sensory information in the classroom setting versus home, which could look very different. A lot of times, parents or vice versa will see things at home that school sees, but they don't necessarily see it at home, or parents will see things at home and kids, kind of at school, it doesn't seem like are any differences. So we're really looking at how a child functions in day-to-day different activities in different environments. We also will have them come into the sensory gym to see how they respond to sensory information. So a sensory gym just essentially looks like an indoor kind of playground, but there's different swings, there's different climbing activities, because we're assessing how their motor skills are, but we're also assessing how they're processing movement, what their body awareness is like, what their coordination is like. We also have different tactile mediums and lights. So the occupational therapist is typically evaluating in the initial session how a child responds to sensory information. So there's some people who are sensory seekers. Like I said, those people who are really energetic. I'm sure you probably have a few in the classroom that if you're thinking about your students right now, maybe the kids who need to move a lot, touching everything, really can't sit still. Obviously we know that that's hard for toddlers, but the kids who are on the go and need a lot of information to kind of fill their cup. On the other hand, we may have children too in the classroom who are very sensitive, right? Or maybe avoid sensory experiences. They don't want to get messy. They cover their ears when it's too loud. They don't necessarily explore playground equipment or gross motor social experiences because they're very sensitive to movement or touch, or it's too much. So again, we're looking at a child's ability to function if it's impacting them in their day-to-day life. If a child has difficulty with touch, for example, that's very hard, right? When you're in learning, you're using your fine motor skills, but it may also impact the child socially because they may not want to be touched or near other people. So then in turn, they're not able to necessarily socialize. So again, we're looking at the sensory systems and how they impact the child's function from day to day. Some red flags, I gave some examples of the sensory processing differences. And I always think that this is helpful, again, when you're thinking about your students. You may have that child, again, who's touching everyone, hits, pushes, bites, puts everything in the mouth all the time, is chewing everything. We may have a child who's in constant motion. A child who's toe walking is typically indicative of a sensory processing difference. So those kids who sometimes are up on their tippy toes are seeking a lot of sensory feedback to help regulate themselves. We may have a child who's a really picky eater, more than what's typical for toddlers, anything underneath 10 foods. That oftentimes children who are very picky eaters have some underlying sensory sensitivity, to smell or touch. So maybe a student in your classroom comes with the same lunch every day, and doesn't really eat, new foods. We may have that child who has really poor personal body awareness and spatial awareness. So that child, during the rug time or story time, who's leaning on others, who's laying all over the floor, who's bumping into others. The child who maybe is too forceful with their play, roughhouse, but almost unaware of how strong they are as well. So those are some things to look out for. Again, if a child just maybe does one or two of these things once in a while, but it's, they're able to kind of go about their day, it doesn't impact their function. It doesn't necessarily mean that they would need OT, but holistically, we're taking a big picture. If there's a child who's really having some of these difficulties and it's impacting them day to day in the classroom, or at home, then it's when we want to address it with OT. The sensory systems I'll talk about, a little bit are, so we know our five senses, but in OT, we also address the three hidden sensory systems. They're called the vestibular sense, your proprioceptive sense, and interoceptive sense. Your vestibular sense is located in your inner ear, and this tells you about where your position and head is in relation to space. And it allows you to detect equilibrium, balance, gravity, and movement. Your vestibular sense is very much connected to your emotional regulation state of your nervous system. It's also very connected to attention, eye-hand coordination, and balance. So if a child who comes in maybe gets referred to OT because they have poor balance and they're tripping and falling all the time, they may have some vestibular processing differences. And in the sensory gym, that is the purpose of a lot of the suspended equipment that we have, a lot of the swings, because there's different techniques and different exercises we do to help integrate that vestibular system as well. In turn, that will help with the balance system. Proprioception is your internal sense of body awareness, and this allows you to know where your body parts are without relying on your visual sense. It allows you to motor plan. It allows you to understand how to move your body throughout space. So an example of this is climbing, going up and down stairs. You just know kind of where to place your feet. You know how much force to use. You're not going to slam your foot down, hopefully. But then again, if you have that child who's tripping and falling, they may slam their feet, or they may miss steps often, or have to move. They may also move very cautiously. A child who's sometimes hitting and pushing and roughhousing and putting a lot of things in their mouth may have a proprioceptive system difference. They may need more information to register that sense. One of the ways that we test for that in OT, there's a few different exercises in the evaluation, but a very simple one is just being able to touch your finger to your nose and switch, and then do it with your eyes closed. So that's your proprioceptive system. It allows you to understand where your nose is on your face without relying on your visual sense. If a child comes in and they're like this, and they can't really do it, it could be indicative of a proprioceptive system difference. And then lastly, we have our interoceptive sense, and this is a newer one that we're still really exploring, and they're doing a lot of research on. And it's very much connected to self-regulation. It's your internal signals from your organs and your internal state. So it allows you to detect things like hunger, thirst, needing to use the restroom, body temperature, emotional regulation, understanding, okay, my heart's beating really fast, my skin is starting to turn red, my muscles are tense, what's that feeling that's happening inside my body? A lot of children who have sensory processing differences will be those kids who have challenges with emotional regulation, don't necessarily always say when they're thirsty or hungry, and they're just always hangry or, cranky, or they don't know when they're well rested. They sometimes may overheat or may even be sick, but not necessarily able to make that connection of what's going on. They may be a child who has takes a very long time for toilet training, because they're not always registering those internal cues when they need to use the restroom, or it may be a child who is always running to the bathroom like last minute and has accidents frequently, what's beyond, the typical toddler range as children are learning to use the bathroom independently. The interoceptive sense, like I said, very connected to the emotional regulation, the self-regulation. A lot of times, if you have challenges picking up on those internal body cues, you can imagine that it's very difficult for you to self-regulate, right? If you're not able to identify what's going on in my body, what are the physiological needs? Because we know that provides the foundation for self-regulation, right? When children are hungry and tired or they're sick, we always want to check in when their behavior is off. We always want to check in on those things because oftentimes it could be one of those things that they're hungry, they're thirsty, they need the bathroom, they're tired, they didn't sleep well. That's impacting their behavior and their ability to self-regulate. Let's see. So the child who has difficulty with self-regulation, this is the child who has maybe big emotions, poor frustration tolerance, gets frustrated very easily, maybe can't work through, a work cycle or problem solve as much compared to other children. Maybe a child who's very rigid, who kind of is always picking the same activities, is very linear, maybe has difficulty being flexible. A child who maybe jumps around from the work cycles frequently, so they have difficulty staying with one work. The child that maybe cannot focus for very long can have some sensory processing differences. Again, your ability to process and filter all this information. Many children who struggle with attention have a lot of auditory sensitivity or visual sensitivity. They get very distracted when the classroom's busy or when it's too loud. See, the children that's maybe, more impulsive, the child that's maybe more passive or withdrawn.
Thank you.
And then this one's a difficulty following classroom routines. But of course, the number one I always hear from toddlers at this age is difficulty with transitions. Those kids who have a hard time moving throughout the day in the classroom routine, maybe is the last kid to clean up all the time or has difficulty going to rest, going to lunch, just moving throughout their day. But oftentimes those children who have difficulty with transitions, it's because that they have challenges with self-regulation. They have challenges knowing how to move on to the next thing. They may be anxious. They may need more time than others. Transitions, I feel like, is a number one referral for lots of toddlers and when they have difficulty. So definitely can be a challenge with self-regulation. And something that we work a lot with our children. Of course, transitions, we need children to always have time to process, and sometimes we live in a society of rushing, unfortunately, especially in New York City. And many times I have parents say to me, it's just so hard. They don't get dressed in the morning, they don't brush their teeth, they don't get breakfast. It's like pulling teeth. I have to do it with them. It's so hard to get them out of the door to school. Oftentimes it's because there's a rush and there's a lot of demands on a child, that sometimes may not be appropriate. But again, the ability to self-regulate, is a lot of that comes with that co-regulation piece, so if parents are getting stressed out, or if you're getting stressed out that they're just not cleaning up, I want them to. We know kids need that co-regulation and they pick up on our nervous system state. And they mirror our nervous system state, right? So we know when we approach a child in a calm, gentle way that they most likely will respond that way. But if we come at them in a very high energy or a very demanding tone, it's going to be met with resistance. The co-regulation is really important and foundational for self-regulation skills. And this goes to everything. Just using your own body, I find, is the best strategy. There's lots of different strategies breathing, heavy work, movement that I'll share with you that are all great. But sometimes we know that we can't always access those tools, right? Maybe we don't have, the opportunity to go do a movement break. The best way to organize and regulate a child is using yourself. So using your tone of voice, your affect, your body language, um, providing time for processing and latency, and using less language. That's the most important thing. Usually, when children are having difficulty with transitions or they're emotional, um, we're often quick that we want to fix it and we just want to move through, and don't always have the time. Um, but we also don't always allow children to process it. So giving them time to process it. But again, when we're in that state, we cannot process verbal language. When you're in a state of fight or flight or shut down, your prefrontal cortex actually just completely shuts down, and then your amygdala activates, which is like your emotional center. So children, especially because of brain development and self-regulation skills not being fully developed up until age 21, they need a lot of that co-regulation, but they need also less language. So it's not the time to reason or talk too much. That's something that I experience a lot with parents, and sometimes educators. Sometimes we know we have so much to do, and sometimes we talk too much. The best things to do is usually use your tone of voice, your affect, and your body language to help regulate a child. Let's see. Okay. Other self-regulation strategies, again, that are helpful. Trying to be proactive. That's the biggest thing as well with a lot of the regulation strategies. When we're in that state of fight and flight, like I said, we're quick, we want to fix it. When sometimes we're trying to do the breathing activity in that moment, or we're trying to do maybe deep pressure or give the child a weighted blanket, and they're refusing, they don't want it. They're in that state of fight or flight because again, they're not able to reason. The logic is not there yet. They're very emotional still because of brain development. The emotional part of the brain is really, really building, and the logic side isn't there. So there's no reason. Of course, for an adult, it may be different, hopefully, when you're able maybe to reason with them. But even as adults, we often need to provide them proactive strategies. So a lot of the times when children have sensory processing differences, OTs will create a sensory diet or home exercise program for them to do at home and teach parents of things to kind of weave throughout the day. In Montessori, I know there's like a lot of emphasis on those big motor movements and pushing and pulling and carrying. That heavy work is very organizing for the nervous system. So again, we want to try to provide lots of opportunities for movement, heavy work, breathing throughout the day versus in the moment, because in the moment it's probably not necessarily going to be as effective. Deep pressure as well. OTs oftentimes will provide things like weighted chew necklaces or weighted vests or weighted blankets or compression vests because again, it provides deep pressure. Deep pressure actually decreases cortisol and increases dopamine and serotonin. So when we're actually doing these activities, some people that doesn't work. There is an actual neurochemical effect that is actually happening when we're engaging with these kinds of regulation strategies. Proprioception, deep pressure is the most impactful. And then after that, breathing is also extremely effective as well. Again, it's very difficult sometimes to teach children breathing activities. So I like to incorporate them throughout the day, blowing bubbles, blowing a pinwheel, different take 5 breathing, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. There's many different breathing strategies. Maybe Susan, I can send some over to you too that have nice visuals to have in the classroom. But again, we're teaching the child how to do that throughout their day when they're regulated. We're not trying to do it in the moment when they're dysregulated. Throughout the day is really important, but breathing and that heavy work and deep pressure is really, really helpful. For some children, sometimes alternative seating could be helpful. So that child who's like really wiggly and has a hard time sitting on the rug and can't sit still somewhat, so they have the bouncy chairs and wobble chairs and cushions to put on chairs. Some children who have difficulty sitting for a meal, that's usually a common request from parents. They just can't sit down and finish their dinner. We may try doing some heavy work strategies before they sit down, but we also maybe we'll put like a TheraBand on the legs of the chair or give them some kind of alternative chair, or a weighted blanket to help them be more organized so that they can sit down and have their meal. But when in doubt, I always say use heavy work. Like if you have a child who's really dysregulated and you see that they need a lot of input throughout the day, always go to heavy work activities because they're the most grounding and they're the most organizing. Movement is very helpful, as we know, movement breaks. So any kinds of activities where you're doing yoga or dancing or a movement like a swing are great. But for some children, they can kind of be counter effective and they can kind of it's too much. So you may have a child where you've done a movement break or you do a recess and you see that they kind of take it too far. It's actually a harder time for them. Whereas typically when children are, during recess time or playground time, that's usually when they're regulated. But sometimes children who have sensory processing differences may get disorganized very easily with too much movement. So it's always important to kind of think about that when you're using these strategies in the classroom. If you're going to do a movement break, like a dance party or a Go Noodle or whatever, yoga, I would always suggest doing after you complete that. I always suggest doing a heavy work activity. Something like that could be, having the child or deep pressure squeeze up and down their arms. It may have the child carrying something heavy, and then a breathing activity followed by it because it will be the most regulating for them. Okay, next part. I talk a little bit in the presentation about the zones of regulation. I like to use that for older children, usually 5 and above. And then there's also the alert program, which I really love for the 3 and 4-year-olds. These are essentially emotional regulation programs that were created by occupational therapists. They're very common. A lot of schools use them. I really like the alert program for this age group because it uses the analogy of a car and tells children like their body is like an engine of a car and it has different speeds. And sometimes it goes slow. And what are those feelings with slow? Maybe tired, sad, low energy, right? Green zone is kind of like just right, calm, focused, going about your day, your regulated state. And then we have the red zone or the fast engine where the kid is maybe, high energy, maybe angry, maybe excited. And it teaches children that we all, just like cars, we have different speeds throughout the day. And there's certain times that we could be really fast and there's certain times we have to slow down our engine. And there's certain times of the day where we have to be in that just right zone. Usually in school, we're expecting children to kind of stay in that middle green zone throughout the day, which is difficult for many children to stay in that space. So again, it just uses the language and it has a visual of a speedometer that I really like to print out and put in a classroom as well and tell children, have engine check-ins. I also coach parents a lot on using this language. Mommy's engine's running really fast right now. I'm getting really, really mad. I'm going to go have a sip of water. I'm going to go take a walk and kind of narrating and letting children know too that also adults have different speeds and different energy levels throughout the day. I talked a little bit about the self-regulation strategies already. Again, so for a child who's maybe always in that red high energy zone, an OT may provide very specific sensory break strategies that would be effective for that child's sensory profile. Sometimes we have children who are very in that low zone, low stamina, may often be tired, often have really fatigues easily, and that may be related to their core strength, right? Oftentimes it is. The children who are really slow in terms of being able to kind of go throughout their day, they're kind of always tired. They may have weak core strength. They may have challenges with sleep and nutrition as well. So those are all things that we want to look at and address when we think about children and their different energy levels throughout the day. In some schools, I've also had teachers put like a station where they can like rev up their engine or they can slow down their engine, so having a designated space in the classroom. Sometimes with hands on the wall for wall push-ups, maybe a picture of some different yoga poses and different breathing poses that then they can connect using this language. Oh, my engine's running really fast right now. I'm going to go to the corner, go do a movement break, some breathing, and then I'll go sit back down. Or if I have a cozy corner in the classroom, that may be a good place to think about putting the alert program language. I find it really helpful. Just the language is really helpful. Many parents, if you're not working with children, don't necessarily sometimes know how to talk to children about these things. So I really like the alert program because it's kid friendly, but it also really provides very clear, simple way to talk to children about their behavior and their regulation skills. That's mostly it for the self-regulation part. Of course, there's the fine motor and visual motor skills. Occupational therapists use a few different standardized evaluations. The Peabody Motor Development Scale is one of them. We have the Berry VMI, the BOT, and they look at motor skills. And it's a standardized evaluation that we typically will do to make sure that a child is hitting their developmental milestones. So we'll look at their things like there's very specific things that they're looking at: block designs, cutting, drawing, beading, lots of things with our hands that I know you get a lot of that experience in your classroom setting, which is amazing. But fine motor skills, very interestingly enough, the new evaluations that have just come out this year, all of the motor skills are being pushed out. So there's actually a lot of research that children are really behind in fine and gross motor skills, but they've pushed some of them back. So even for walking, it used to be 12 to 14 months. Now it's 16 to 18 months. Jumping used to be 24 to 26 months. Now it's 28 to 29 months. Snipping with scissors used to be 28 months. Believe it or not. Now they pushed it to 36 months because they're finding that children, and a lot of it probably has to do with just lifestyle and more screen time. Unfortunately, we're seeing a difference in their motor skills. But oftentimes children who are referred for OT, they'll have difficulty with handwriting, holding a marker correctly, using scissors, may have difficulty with drawing. Those older children, we work a lot with children on handwriting when they get a little bit older as well. So children just are not using their hands as much, but I can't stress that enough that there should be more fine motor. And I know that in your school, you have lots of opportunity for those kinds of different activities, which is amazing. We also, like I said, live in a very fast-paced society where we're quick to want 4-year-olds to write letters and to handwriting, which is not necessarily developmentally appropriate. First, we want to have a child be able to scribble, then comes a vertical line, horizontal line, then comes a cross, then comes a circle, then comes a square, right? There's a developmental progression to pre-writing skills, actually. So there's some things that children should be doing: cutting, drawing a person, drawing shapes, tracing, before they move right on to handwriting skills. And unfortunately, most kindergartens now, and especially in New York City, I say unfortunately because for an OT, it doesn't align with development, but they are doing, their kids are writing in kindergarten, which was very different from when I went to kindergarten. So there is an expectation for kindergartners to write, but it's not necessarily always developmentally appropriate. So this evaluation that we do allows us, it's standardized, it allows us to see if a child's meeting their skills related to their peers and their age group. We also look at gross motor skills, especially in a sensory gym setting. We do have pediatric PTs that also will assess gross motor skills and neuromuscular skills. Neuromuscular skills relate to things like muscle tone, joint stability, and core strength. So oftentimes we do see a lot of children who have difficulty with motor skills because they have lower muscle tone. What is muscle tone? It's your state of your muscle at rest. If you walk through New York City, you'll see some people who are really toned and have good posture and clear definition. That person may have higher muscle tone. And then you may see somebody who's has really poor posture, is kind of floppy, for lack of a better word. They may have lower muscle tone. So we're all born with different muscle tone. And different postural stability and joint stability. But that lays, again, the foundation for fine motor and gross motor skills. So we're always looking at core strength. That's also something that is decreased a lot in children. As well, we're seeing a lot of children with poor core strength. You may see that child have difficulty sitting upright on the rug. That child may be in a W all the time, sitting with their legs to the side. We see lots of W's sitting. Related to core strength. It's often related to core strength, and that child may also have a lot of joint laxity. When you have low muscle tone, you tend to be more flexible because there's less co-contraction of your muscles. So you may see that that child is very flexible and they prefer to use a wider base of support when sitting. But when we're sitting crisscrossed with our legs straight out in a tailor position, we're using more of our core strength and stability. So that has changed a lot. Over the years as well, and things even like gross motor skills, doing monkey bars was something that we want children to do between like 3.5 to 5. Now we're seeing that most children that age group are not able to do the monkey bars, and we're seeing it actually more after age 5 and up. So a lot of the research is showing that there is a decrease in the core strength and stability. Again, a lot of it goes related to just lifestyle. Children should be out doing gross motor play for 3 to 4 hours a day. In New York City, even if you do recess at school and lots of movements, it's very difficult for some kids who are in school all day. They don't or have access to a backyard or a swing set. So definitely there's a correlation there for sure. And then the gross motor skills are more of those larger muscle skills. So things like jumping, using the stairs. That's also one that has changed too. And I see a lot of children, New York City, some of it may be exposure. A lot of kids who are in the stroller a little bit too long, they're in the stroller, they're 7 or 8 years old, they're always taking the elevator. So they're not necessarily exposed to being able to do stairs. But being able to understand how to negotiate the stairs, use a reciprocal pattern, climbing up and then climbing down, balance skills, as well as jumping skills, and eye-hand coordination, so like catching and throwing a ball, kicking a ball. Those are all gross motor skills that we want children to develop. Again, there's a progression, right? So that's kind of the specialty of doing the evaluation is parents sometimes say, I don't know what my child's supposed to be doing. I asked the pediatrician, they said that he's fine, but I see on the playground that they really can't keep up and they're not able to climb. And I notice in their sports class, like they're run very slow or they're behind. So the OT or PT will look at their gross motor skills to see if there are any areas that they need to work on. Again, like I said, there's a progression, jumping, and then it moves on to hopping. Later on comes skipping, galloping. So there are different developmental milestones we want to look for when we're evaluating children. Oftentimes, the gross motor from a OT perspective is we kind of use a sensory motor lens. So again, if your sense of balance, your vestibular system, and your body awareness, your proprioceptive system is not organizing information effectively, you'll see a child who's really clumsy, maybe, and uncoordinated. So an OT is really looking at it from a sensory integration lens, whereas a PT looks at it a little bit more from a biomechanical lens. PTs are also very skilled at things like balance and gait and using the stairs. So oftentimes there's a lot of overlap between OT and PT, especially in pediatrics, but PTs are much more able to address things like running, gait, balance, and stair negotiation skills. You'll see OTs also work on things like eye-hand coordination and jumping and hopping as well. I think I want to make sure that I have time for questions at the end. If anyone has any questions about any of the skills that I have mentioned, or any of the areas that I mentioned. Yes, that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Do you think you could talk a little bit about what the screening and evaluation process looks like?
Sure. Yes, definitely. So there's many different ways to go about receiving OT. Some families will go through the state process. So there's early intervention services. There's also the CPSC, Committee for Special Education for Preschool Students, where any parent can request an evaluation. Some families decide not to go that route and they decide to work with a OT privately. Depending on their concerns, if there's a lot of concerns in the classroom, sometimes we'll do a classroom observation as well. And then we'll also do the evaluation in the gym. So the evaluation is typically 2 hours where we're administering these formalized evaluations. We have a sensory questionnaire that we have the parents fill out. We always encourage school to fill it out as well. And then the OT is going to take all that information, score the testing that will provide, percentiles and ranges of where the child's performing. To qualify for services through the state, a child has to have more than a 33% delay in development. So there has to be a delay on the testing. They use that to kind of help understand who would qualify for services, right? Because everyone would benefit from OT. In a perfect world, everyone I think would, all kids would benefit from OT. But in terms of insurance and how the state determines they want to see a 33% delay. Now, in private practice, we have a little bit more flexibility. If a parent comes and they want to work on some things, if they see the child's not that delayed, maybe they're 20% delayed, or the parent has a lot of concerns, of course, we can work with them. In the evaluation process, we're scoring everything, then we write a full report, and then we typically will meet with the parents to go over the report as well. So it's pretty comprehensive. A OT evaluation typically will be anywhere between 10 to 15 pages. Again, we're looking at fine and gross motor skills, sensory processing, play skills, self-help skills, social skills. And then after that, we'll also talk to the family about what the goals are in terms of therapy. So we'll also come up with a plan. If a child has a lot of different areas that they need support in, we may recommend once or twice weekly. And we may also come up with goals for anywhere between 6 months to a year. Some children come and I see them for a few weeks, 2 or 3 months as well. So there's lots of flexibility in terms of how we work with families and how we create goals. My practice is very family centered. So again, I'm really working and collaborating with the family on the goals and talking about the areas that they really want to work on. In the state evaluation process, it's a little bit different because they really want very measurable goals and they tend to be much more motor related. So it may look like Johnny will be able to cut out a circle within 3 months, or Johnny will be able to, draw a person. It could be something that's very quantitative. However, in private practice, there's some children where we're working on self-regulation. It's a little bit more qualitative, so it's a little bit harder but to measure, but we will create goals either way with the family. If there's any children in the classroom that I always offer, I will go to schools too if parents are open to me. I've worked with many schools where they'll say, okay, we'll have an OT come in and do a screen on a child. We're not sure. We see that there's some things going on. We don't really know how to guide the family. And sometimes approaching all these conversations with curiosity, I always say is the best way. So a lot of times when I'm talking to parents, I wonder why they're doing that. I wonder why they're having a hard time keeping up in soccer class. I wonder why they're having a hard time in the classroom. And that really allows us to be able to collaborate together. Some children will also receive a referral for occupational therapy from their pediatrician. They may also receive it from a neuropsych evaluation. So sometimes when children are a little bit older, they do more comprehensive testing. And we oftentimes will get children who receive like a dysgraphia diagnosis, which is a child who has learning disability and writing and actually being able to write graphomotor skills. So they'll often prescribe OT, for example. So many different ways to kind of go about the process. And some families I've worked with, in a very consultative basis as well, where I give them some suggestions and I check in with them. And then there are some kids who would come weekly for therapy as well. it's always with the same OT too, at my practice, and really forming a relationship with the kids. Again, it depends on the child. There's some children that come to my practice because of their learning profile and their needs that they've been doing OT for years and they need support, and it's always kind of evolving and changing. But again, there's a lot of availability to work with the families, which I think is really important.
So if you find a child is really having a hard time at circle time, for instance, and you mentioned, I think that heavy work was something that you recommended. What kinds of things would you do like before circle time if you knew the child was having a lot of problems with circle?
Yes. I definitely giving jobs, which I know that happens in your school too, but like kids love jobs, right? Because it gives them like a meaning and like a sense, it makes them feel part of something. Most children love to help. So I always like to do jobs in the classroom. Maybe it's like carrying a stack of books. You may have a basket and put a lot of books and have them, hey, can you carry that? I need help with this box of books, and just have them move something heavy, carry it to the circle, for example. Oh, we have like these paint jugs. Can you push them down the hall for me before I need help? We need to bring them to the other classroom, right? I need help moving the chairs. Sometimes I'll have children push in furniture, wipe down tables. All that is really good heavy work and very simple activities that you can do in the classroom, right? Because you again, giving a child a job. If a child has if that's not enough for that child, I may with the entire class say, okay, we're going to sit down for a circle. We're going to read. We have to get our engines to that just right zone. We're going to do 10 frog jumps, and ribbit, 10 frog jumps. Give ourselves 10 big squeezes up and down the arms, and now blow out the candles. A breathing strategy, right? So there's a movement, a heavy work, and a breathing. I will send you, Susan, a list of these activities as well with the breathing, but the different ones that you can do right before sitting for a circle. So and that takes what, 1 minute, right? 10 frog jumps, 10 squeezes, 10 blowing out the candles. And it will help you most importantly too, it helps you as a teacher as well, right? Regulate. And it's much easier to do that versus having the child who's has a really difficult time and keep on having to say, hey, sit still, hey, fix your body, hey, right? It's much easier to proactively do these strategies in the classroom. And kids love them, right? And it also teaches kids, I'm getting my body ready and I feel good in my body, so I'm able to learn, right? It teaches kids proactively. What happens sometimes when we're not using it proactively and when we're using things reactively, hey, you're having a hard time sitting still, put this weighted blanket on. A child perceives that as maybe shameful or maybe that they did something wrong and they may refuse it or may not want it because they feel different or isolated. So it's really important to think about the approach when using these strategies.
I think, I don't know if it was you or Reagan at the last presentation, she said that sometimes too much movement can be actually the opposite effect. So like, I like that idea of having the heavy work, the movement, and the breathing.
Yeah. Breathing strategy. Yeah, exactly. And that sequence is pretty organizing for all of us, so it's a good way to think about it. And definitely, yes, there's that child who, if you do, like I said, too much movement, if you do sometimes like a dance party, then the dance party's over and they can't bring it back down. Like they're kind of just, they're taking it to the next level. So this kind of sequence that's organized will really have a profound effect. A movement break like that a heavy work activity or something like that can have an effect on a child for anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes, the research shows. Some children longer. So depending on how long the circle is, maybe it is 15 minutes, hopefully not too long because some kids can't sit that long at this age. But even if you're having a longer circle, then you may want to do a movement break in the middle when you see the children, losing focus, or you keep on having to remind the child to sit. It could be good to kind of break it up as well.
There's a question here in the chat.
Yes, I see that.
We have okay, go ahead.
Okay. It says, we have a child in our classroom who takes off their shoes every day during both snack time and lunchtime. Do you have any suggestions on how we can help them? We were wondering if it's a sensory need, maybe his feet needs to feel the floor. When he's sitting in the chair, is that for that child? Is he sitting in the chair? Does his feet touch the ground?
Yes, his feet does touch the ground.
Okay. His feet touch the ground, but he prefers to be, there's socks off too?
No, just his shoes.
Just his shoes. I don't, I mean, maybe it makes him feel more supported, more grounded, like feeling his feet on the floor versus his shoes, me getting more sensory feedback. It's maybe regulating for him. I would ask questions again, like approaching things with curiosity. Like maybe I don't know if you've mentioned to parents, like, hey, we've noticed that, this is what so and so is always doing during lunchtime. Have you noticed that as well at home? Does that happen during meal times? Do we know if that happens at home?
The parents said during conferences it happened once during one time when they went out for lunch. But
But
we were wondering maybe since at home he's not really wearing shoes while he eats.
yeah, maybe. I mean, that's definitely, I would ask questions. Um, Parents, I'd ask where he sits, like what kind of table he sits at. A lot of times in New York City, kids are like, sitting like at a bar stool. There's a, limited space sometimes. So I would definitely ask questions, but I am curious if it maybe just gives him a little more feedback. The children sometimes who want to be barefoot all the time or don't want to wear socks and shoes, they may have some tactile processing differences. That's definitely a newer behavior. I'm not completely sure, but I would definitely ask questions to parents as well.
Okay, thank you.
Oops. Okay.
Anybody have any questions? So I think the biggest thing that I sort of took away from this time, I mean, I've heard your presentation before, but I think that proactive piece and also pairing some things together. So heavy work, breathing work, movement, proactively can really help children be prepared for kind of what's next. And it's just very, very challenging for some kids to be in a social environment where they're expected to move carefully and not be running around and not be running into other people or let's see how.
Yes, absolutely. But also too, always remembering, let's say regulation before expectation, right? Like you can't expect the child to sit and do work if they're not regulated. So if we're proactively regulating the child, then they're able to kind of meet those expectations throughout the day and the demands as well. So I talk to parents a lot about that too, because sometimes there's too much expectation or they're, at the moment, but the child is dysregulated first. We have to work on the regulation state of the child's nervous system and their sensory system so that they can be able to engage in those higher demanding level activities. So self-help skills, as well that, parents really want their kids to do. But sometimes if a child is really dysregulated, it's hard for them to be able to access any of those higher level skills. So really regulation proactively, I think is really important. And like I said, there is a lot of, screen time, more sedentary lifestyle. There is an increase in anxiety in children. We know all the research shows as well. Because we're in a very fast paced, there's instant gratification children are used to right now, and slowing things down and really working with the child on their nervous system and using these strategies proactively really helps the child be able to any person. Many people I work with, parents were like, I have a challenge with many parents I work with have challenges with self-regulation too. But they were never taught, right? Because we didn't know they necessarily weren't taught any of these skills. So I feel like it's just a lifelong, and so valuable to be able to regulate, especially in our world right now. I feel like everyone could benefit from regulation.
Any other questions from anyone? Now it's time. If you have any, we have an expert here who can help. You got something over there? Okay, go ahead, Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have to unmute though.
I'm in EC. We have a kid who's quite young, basically the youngest in the room, and also has, we think, not diagnosed, some low muscle tone, has some speech and communication things. So there's a lot going into it. But he hits a lot, hit, push, all that stuff. I'm I do like deep breaths with him. And he seems to respond to that, but I'm wondering if you have any other ideas. I'm sort of wondering if when I make other suggestions, like give yourself a squeeze, he doesn't really seem to process how to do that. It's kind of a hard idea. So if there's anything just like super simple on the level of like, besides like deep breathing.
Yeah, I definitely would try, I mean, squeezing himself, maybe something for him to squeeze, something that's like anything that's resistive for those children who really like to hit and seek a lot of feedback. Sometimes also guiding them to work that in the classroom. Sometimes things like stamps, squeezing clay, kinetic sand, can give a lot of that sensory feedback that meet that tactile need. So if those are things available in the classroom setting, you may want to guide or encourage those kinds of activities throughout the day. As well, he may also really respond to a compression shirt that he can wear. Again, because he has low muscle tone and speech and language differences, it may be hard. Motor planning may be difficult. So this is why maybe this is too complex, but maybe wearing a compression shirt that gives his body a nice big squeeze could be really helpful. Something like a stress ball for him to squeeze. And sometimes I even in the classroom will put those kids who like to push and hit. I just put a picture of two hands and you.
We have a push spot and a jump spot, and we do need him to like some banging and squeezing work, but yeah.
And will he use those?
He will. He loves the push and the jump. He needs to be redirected to it sometimes, but yeah, he likes those. But yeah, we can keep
Push, jump, heavy carrying something heavy. Sometimes a backpack. I'll put 10% of body weight. Should be no more than that. But sometimes I'll have parents put like a canned food or something heavy in their backpack that he can carry too. That may help ground him throughout the day. It may be nice to do for a walk. A big Amazon box that's somewhat heavy. I've had schools just put a box and you can push, maybe if there's a hallway space that you can push up and down the hallway as well.
Okay. Yeah, we had a heavy work, but I think it might be too heavy. So the 10% is a helpful guideline. Thank you.
Yeah. It's typically 10%.
We've had like laundry soap bottles emptied, or like a clear bottle, maybe like those giant apple juice ones, and then fill it with colored water. And then
That's exactly what we had. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then move it from one spot to the other across the room. Like there could be spots with taped off.
He doesn't seem to gravitate to it. He'll do it when I specifically ask, but it may be too heavy. We could try.
Yeah, it could be that it's
work.
Especially if he has low muscle tone, he's gonna have, strength is going to be maybe a challenge. So he think experimenting with the weight is a part of it. They also make weighted lap pads. They make weighted stuffed animals as well. Sometimes kids like to carry those or put them on their lap throughout the day as well. But definitely he probably needs a lot of that throughout the day versus again just in the moment. So thinking about kind of throughout his day, how to kind of have him do those activities proactively will probably help with the hitting piece as well. When he's hitting, is he looking for like reaction? Is there a attentional?
Yeah, basically. Mostly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a whole other piece, right, too, and just on how to respond to those behaviors and like consistently. For some children, it's redirection. For some children, it's very clear behavior plans, and some children it's positive reinforcement. So sometimes you have to kind of also explore what works, also talk to the parents about how they're responding to that as well for consistency. Sometimes kids, they're very smart, but they know, oh, this person's not going to say, don't do that, and mom is going to yell. And so they're finding consistency in how to respond to that behavior is also important.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Thanks,
Jess.
Susan.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
All
I will
right.
go over some of those breathing strategies. If anyone ever has a question about a student, I think I've had a few guys reach out to me in the past before about different students, or if any suggestions, I'm always happy to answer.
Great. All right. Thanks.
Thank
Good rest of
you.
your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.